far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Takia Wedderburn. I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon. So very excited to be here and so happy that you could be here to join us. We have a very incredible topic. We're going to get into some really good conversation this afternoon. So just wanted to remind everybody what our topic is for this afternoon. So this afternoon, we're going to be discussing barriers for BIPOCs, BIPOCs working in the Canadian sports system. So we're going to be looking at amateur as well as professional. So I just want to start off by introducing our very dynamic panelists that we have. We have three incredible panelists that are here this afternoon that we're going to be speaking with. So our first panelist this afternoon is Shauna Buckle. So Shauna is currently the president, CEO of Inclusion and Canadian Sports Network. Being a sports leader is all about empowering and supporting others. BIPOC provides expertise and advice to internal and external communities regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion related matters within the Canadian amateur sports industry. She also advocates removing barriers for BIPOC at all levels within the sports system. And next up, our other panelist this afternoon is Bernice Carnegie. Bernice is the co-founder and president of the Carnegie Initiative Canada for Acceptance and Inclusion and Hockey Advocating for Social Justice Transformation. The organization has held 3 summits covering hundreds of thought leaders from across North America. Although she has experienced many careers throughout her life, including stay-at-home mom, financial advisor, executive director, and co-founder of 2 charities, she is the international speaker and published author. She is the recipient of numerous awards for education, development, and communications. In the sports world, she has made history as part of the first BIPOC ownership of a championship women's professional hockey team and was just selected as an honorary member of the Etobicoke Sports Hall of Fame. And then next up, we have Dr. Leisha Strawn. Dr. Leisha Strawn is a professor and currently serving as Associate Dean Research and Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management at the University of Manitoba. Her research is centered on positive youth development through sports and improving coaching practices to make sports spaces better for youth. With 30 years of coaching experience, Dr. Strawn has also been part of the research group with the Anti-Racism in Sports campaign in Winnipeg, a former national team member in the sports of baton twirling. Dr. Strawn brings these experiences to her research and applied experiences. She also directs a group called Nancy School for the Performing Arts, an arts-based group that works to teach children and youth about African and Caribbean culture through music, drama, and dance. All right, so we have a very, as I mentioned, a very hot topic this afternoon that we're going to be discussing. And just want to remind all of our viewers that are on Zoom that if you do have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. And as we get started this afternoon, I'll do my best to take a look at the chat and respond to any questions that or comments that you may have for this afternoon session. So without further ado, I think we should get started. We have a lot to cover this afternoon. So first, I'm going to start off with Shauna. So Shauna, my question for you is, with the Diversity in Sports conference in May, why was it important to have the Emerging BIPOC Leaders program?
When I looked to create the conference last year, I was remembering what it was like for me growing up with my career and not seeing anybody that looks like me, not being able to kind of relate to people that have walked in the same path that I walked in. And I know how much a big difference it can be to have a support system around you. So I wanted to have something for the future leaders, like our emerging leaders, but also people that are starting their career so they can see you are not alone. There are other people that look like you. There are other people that are in the same career as you. They just might not be in the same province as you, but they are other people here in Canada that you can get together. And for most of the time, most likely they are the only colored person in their organization, especially in amateur sports, that for them being able to see somebody else that looks like them in the same sport but in a different province and can be very uplifting. And you never know how that can also continue to help somebody pursue their career in sports, because sometimes people leave because they don't see any other colored people. They don't see someone that looks like them and they feel defeated. They feel that they don't have a network or anybody that they can turn to. And I remember putting myself back in that position 20 years ago, what it was like starting off and not having that support network. And when I went to the United States, there are so many support networks for people of color, especially Blacks. And I was like, why don't we have that in Canada? And it's like, why do I have to continuously go to the States to get that support when I should be able to get that support here with people that look like me, that have the same drive and ambition as me? And that's kind of where that conference started. Last year, we had 45 youth or emerging leaders between the ages of 18 to 30 get together. And this year we have 100. So it shows that there is a need, that there are people that are out there that do want to be a part of this network. And it's not just about being an athlete, it's not just about being a coach. It's here's administrators, here's sport journalists, here's people in sport medicine. Like it's all different kinds of fields in sports that we're bringing together. And it's also showing that just because we're Black, just because we're a person of color, we don't have to just stick to the narrative that people have put out there for us, and that we are able to navigate and do different things and follow our own kind of path that we want to go through. So we're hoping that's what we want our emerging BIPOC leaders to get out of the conference when they attend. And the fact that we were able to double the number this year is actually pretty exciting.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And I have to say congratulations for doubling your numbers this year. That is absolutely incredible.
Thank
and
you.
I think, again, just speaks to the fact that there is clearly a need for it, especially over here in Canada. So again, congratulations on that win. All right, so my next question is for Bernice. So Bernice, your father's story, as well as his posthumous induction into the Hall of Fame in 2022, inspired all in the world of sports. Can you talk about why this was so revolutionary and what we can learn from this?
It was pretty darn exciting. And part of the reason for that is that my father came from another era. He started his strong hockey knowledge in the 1930s, and it was the 1940s and 50s where he was almost a loner. There were two other Black men at the time. One was his brother Ozzy, and the other was Manny McIntyre. And those three men opened the door to having someone that looked different play in basically all white sports and all white communities. And so in this particular era, there wouldn't be people that would really remember who my father was. And so for him to get inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame was quite the feat. And part of that was because so many people wanted to keep his story alive. But you had to be in the right circles to actually hear about the story, because there are so many that come to me and go, well, why didn't I know about this? Where was I? Where was he? And of course, part of that is that our stories from the Black community have not always been shared in our education system. We have been the visible invisible. And I am very fortunate and very privileged to have continued to share the story, because I worked with my father for 30 years. And we went into schools all over Ontario, spoke to about 20,000 students a year, in helping them to empower themselves. So all of this talk that we have about not being seen, or not having representation, or not having leaders to look up to, we have a big job to do. And that job is to help empower our young people to be strong enough that when they're faced with the challenges of not being allowed in the door, that they don't give up, that they keep reinventing themselves. And so I was delighted to eventually learn how my father was the master of reinvention, because I had no idea some of the obstacles that were put in front of him. And yet he kept going around those obstacles, and he kept finding ways to make sure that he was contributing to our communities. So we're not supposed to stand back and just look at history. We are history. Each of us is part of that history that's changing lives for other people. And so there were many, many people out there who were signing petitions, who wanted to see my father in this Hall of Fame. And I thought I didn't care. By the time, he died in 2012, and I'm going, you know what? It's too late. You missed the boat. You didn't give him his flowers when he should have had his flowers. And so I continued to help people by giving them information, but I stayed out of it. And I really thought, it doesn't matter. But now I know it does. Because when it happened, I went through a whole myriad of emotions. At first, I was in disbelief because they didn't tell me ahead of time that it was happening. Then my nephew called, and he's going, "Did you hear?" And I'm listening on the phone while he's listening on TV, and the chatter was on there. Herb Carnegie got into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I started jumping up and down like I was a little kid in the candy shop. And then I ran to my computer. I was about to have a meeting with some of my colleagues, and I looked on my email, and the Hall of Fame, it said, "Call them." So I called them, and then I also put up the Zoom meeting, and I'm talking on the phone, and they're telling me about it. And I started to cry. I started to cry because it wasn't just about our family. It was about the thousands and thousands of people in the community for years and years and years who kept saying, "Why isn't Herb Carnegie in the Hockey Hall of Fame?" So it wasn't just about me, it was about our family and a whole huge family of community all across North America who wanted this to happen and knew it should have happened. And so was it revolutionary? In some ways, when you take somebody from another era and you bring them into this era and you put them up there and say, you were a leader. You are still a leader. And now my father is in his rightful place. His story will be there forever, and there will be young people who will go and see his plaque and say, didn't know about Herb Carnegie, the black hockey player. There aren't too many of them in this Hall of Fame. There's only a handful. But we are part of that history, and it's important that we're there. So let's revolutionize the world and let people know that we're there, just like Shauna and her conference that helps bring people together to make that difference.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's so important, as you mentioned, Bernice, to honor those when they're here, when they're still alive. And absolutely incredible that your father was eventually honored in the way that he should have been originally. So yes, definitely, I'm sure very, very emotional for your family, as well as for all of those young people that really want to get into sports, and they don't see a lot of representation. So definitely being able to look at someone like your father definitely does make a huge world of difference. Okay.
Sorry,
So
I just wanted to put in there,
yeah.
Bernice, you didn't mention he also has a coin that he got from, is it the Canadian dollar, or because I have his coin on my one of my little back there with her father on the coin, which I got when the tour came out a couple of years
Are you
ago.
sure that was my father or Willie O'Ree?
Was it? I'm like, I remember
I
there's
think it might have been
is
Willie O'Ree that
Willie.
was on.
My
Yes.
apologies.
And
My
that is
apologies.
and that's revolutionary. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Willie O'Ree was came to the hockey scene and made it into the NHL 4 years after my father retired. And to think that this gentleman was out there doing similar things eventually that my father was doing, interacting with young people and helping them. I am thrilled about Willie, and Willie has been a friend of our family, has stayed with our family, has participated in events with our family, and it just, I went to Willie's induction, so he got inducted into the Hall of Fame before my father, and I sat in that audience, and I felt like I was sitting there for my dad. I was sitting there for my dad and knowing that my father would have been cheering this amazing gentleman on. And that's what we need to do with all of those who are celebrating the best of who they are. We need to find reasons why we support them and support them heavily because not to be jealous, not to be envious, but to be there to make sure that each of the people in our community gets the kind of recognition that they deserve because it's taken them a longer time to do it and it's been harder for them to do it. And you got to cheer them on because they didn't give up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I just want to just refer to the chat really quickly. There's a few comments that are coming through. So someone just stated both Mr. O'Ree and Mr. Carnegie have been outstanding champions of equity and diversity in hockey. Definitely. And also we need a Herb Carnegie Canada Post stamp in 2025. Let's get it done. I love that. I think we definitely need to
Well,
see
I love it
more.
even more.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We need to have that really circulated and have that information, so that our young people are aware of some of the individuals that have contributed to the world of sports in Canada specifically. And it definitely needs to be circulated more, for sure.
Well, there is a Willie stamp. There is a Willie O'Ree stamp out there as well. And
Wonderful.
I received a lovely thank you note, and on the envelope was Willie's stamp. And I thought, how appropriate is that?
Ah, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. All right, so I'm going to move on to Dr. Strawn. All right, so Dr. Strawn, my question for you is, why is there a lack of Black coaches in sports in Canada?
Thanks so much for including me in this conversation. I feel absolutely honored to be on this panel with Shauna and Miss Bernice, and I think we should go for a stamp and a coin. Let's just do it all at once and just get it done. I want to kind of go through this ideas question about representation within Black coaches, and it's something that's been top of mind lately during Black History Month. We had a panel discussion here about this topic here in Winnipeg, and I've been part of a research group led at the University of Ottawa, looking very broadly at different issues related to social justice within the sports system, particularly as it relates to youth development. And the students in Ottawa were able to do a really, really great, survey of many high school sport coaches in Canada. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of coaches who it seemed like they did not want to necessarily touch conversations related to anti-racism and what that looks like in sport, and really due to the fact the representation as well, not due to the facts, but one of the factors was that there's a huge overrepresentation of white coaches within Canada school sport. So, so that led to a discussion about why this overrepresentation occurs. And some of the things I guess that have been rolling around my mind, I guess there's three main things. And one that's already come up with this lack of representation at various levels, as Shauna spoke to, and that Bernice spoke to as well within hockey, but just across the board. And when we think about developing young people through sport and who they have access to through our school system, that there's just not a lot of Black coaches who are engaged. And for a variety of reasons, it was really interesting to have one of the few Black coaches here in Winnipeg sort of on our panel and speak to this idea that it really has a lot to do with time, and we're probably going to get to that later. But you know, when practices are number one, and also number two, that there's not as many, at least Black teachers here, and Black teachers are the ones who tend to drive high school sport here in Winnipeg. So so that was an interesting conversation. The next thing was just this idea of identifying leadership potential, and that when we have young Black youth involved in sport, we tend to pigeonhole them in the box of just a performance, you know, just being athletes, and that's the only thing that we want to use their Black bodies within these spaces to do. And that there needs to be a lot more concerted effort, I guess, of thinking beyond only performance, but thinking of leadership and also calling into action young people. And so when we see potential in young people within their sports spaces, that it's really our responsibility as coaches, as sport administrators, as teachers, as whoever is in those spaces to encourage those young people and to give them opportunities to either, you know, help in practice, you know, have little coaching duties, those types of things, sort of pull them along, right? So that idea of mentorship being really important. And the last thing that we spoke about on this panel that I guess I've been thinking about a lot more too is time. And Shauna spoke to it earlier, due to a variety of reasons why we don't have a lot of Black coaches within sport, period. Is not only some socioeconomic constraints, but also, you know, when we have coaches, they tend to be lots of volunteer coaches. And we know that volunteer coaches are working full time and trying to blend in their passion and what they love about sport in these spaces. And so there's a lot of invisible work that occurs in their workplaces and their own things that they do, and that tends to pull them away from following the passions that they want to, and particularly sport. And not only barriers to cost, but also just barriers to time and being able to actually take the time that's required in order to, and have the space that's required within their spaces in order to actually pursue coaching, because it is a pursuit. It's not something that just comes to you, but there's a lot of education, a lot of courses, a lot of additional courses now, particularly as we deal with safe sport, that coaches need to be aware of and need to take. And so it becomes more of a barrier, even with the more time it takes to train, but also just other constraints. So yeah, so that's what I would say to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that definitely gives us something to think about, as you mentioned, Dr. Strawn, in terms of the timing that coaches have to dedicate to, and that you know, we may not always think of, you know, coaches having to volunteer their time, and sometimes that does pose a bit of a challenge, you know, especially if you know, there is a Black educator, for example, that does want to volunteer their time to be coaches, and also trying to really just balance that as well as whatever other external commitments that they have, you know, whether they have a family or any other, you know, extracurricular commitments that they have. So that definitely is giving us something to think about. That I think even before this conversation, I never really, you know, even for myself, I didn't think of it that way, that coaches really have to essentially volunteer their time when they are working with students, for sure.
Yeah. And again, it's just, as I mentioned, it's just highlighting that invisible work as well. So as Black educators, you know, those who are in the system, Whether you're a coach or not, you're probably one of a few in your school. And so
Yeah.
you are called on to do a lot of invisible work and mentorship and young and be that role model for young Black students who want to come and talk to you because you look like them and they want to speak with you and you want to as well. It's not a burden, but it's just an extra piece of work that we don't necessarily take enough time to really fully consider within the school system. And asked to be on many committees, asked to be on EDI committees, asked to be on these committees that you feel like as the only Black person in the school that if you're not on that committee, it's going to be, there's going to be something thought about you. So you spend time there instead of spending time necessarily with coaching and doing something you want to do. So it's really trying to honor that as much as possible and reminding principals, other educators, administrators of that work that's happening too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So my next
And
question is for, go ahead, Bernice.
And it really is too a feeling of love. You have to love the young people. You have to care enough that you're going to extend yourself beyond your job situation. And for the many people that go out there to volunteer, it takes a special kind of person to say, I want to give more than what I'm expected to give. Mm-hmm. And if we didn't have people like that in our communities, we certainly would have a sorry world. It's hard enough as it is, but to just go that extra step. And that's one of the things that I loved about my dad is that he did start the first registered hockey school in Canada back in 1955. And it had a character component to it. And now I see many of the hockey schools that are out there, they're now going back to certain basics, not just the skills of the game, because we know that everybody can't be an NHL player. That's not going to happen. There's only a tiny number who make it to that level or make it to the Olympics or the Worlds or whatever. Most of these young people are playing because they just love being with other people. They're learning new skills. They're developing their bodies. They're developing their minds. It's a huge opportunity to teach young people leadership. And so we need the commitment of those who just love life and want to be there to help educate, to help support our young people into those leadership roles as well.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And I wasn't aware of that at all until I watched the documentary Black Ice, and that really, it was really, revelatory to me that they really took time and that you shared that information with them about the hockey school that was started and this idea, being a researcher who works in this area of positive youth development, right, and the importance of sport to build the human, the whole human, and not just physical aspects. It's inspirational, right, to know that that your dad was able to have the vision, to start looking at how do we actually educate the human and knowing that that does not happen without lots of effort. We tend to spend a lot of time as coaches in the physical realm, teaching drills and skills and all those things which we know are important in sport. I mean, it's why kids do sport. They want to feel competent and feel like they're gaining confidence through sport. But those pieces of the human and building the person, that also takes the same amount of intentionality. And so we need to honor those who have already been doing that ahead of us and try to remember that as coaches, that extra piece is so important. And again, that demands more training for coaches for some, to really being able to take that time and practices to actually teach kids those positive skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's so important to have coaches that are really invested in young people and that genuinely care about them. And I think it also, as well, I think we had spoke about this earlier, is it really adds to a child's or a youth's self-esteem as well when they have coaches that look like them. They can identify with them. They can share, specific feelings or experiences that they have encountered. They can share that with their local coaches, and that really just, I think, provides an additional level of encouragement for them that they can continue to pursue. Because I think we had also spoken about this earlier about how some young people, because they don't see a lot of representation, they may choose to no longer pursue their passion in that particular field of sports, because they don't see that representation, and that is unfortunate because of something as small as, not seeing that representation as well. So I just want to move along to my next question for Shauna, which is, what are some of the challenges BIPOCs are currently seeing in the amateur sports program?
There are so many, but we will keep it to like a minimum that we can get through in our conversation. It's especially being a BIPOC, being a Black woman working in amateur sport right now, the amount of sport organizations that are creating EDI committees or anti-Black racism committees, but then a lot of their meetings don't go anywhere. It's just a roundtable conversation that they have maybe once a month, but then it stops. And then you don't see action. Or if you see programming, the programming, I call them the one and done programming. Because great, I got some money from the government, I got some money from a sponsor to run a program, but how do you make that sustainable? How do we make sure that this program isn't a one and done, so I can get the photos that I need to get, so I can put the photos up on my social media and then end up using the exact same photos for the next 5 years? So it's, how do we make it sustainable? How do we look to grow and not just, I call it like tunnel vision, where it's like, okay, I got funding just for players. I want to just see players. Why can't we see officials? Why can't we see coaches, not just at the grassroots level, but with our provincial teams, with our national teams, or a team manager, sports information? Like, it's kind of think outside the box of what possibilities are available for people. And a lot of the times everybody is relying on the government to start something. I'm like, well, why do we have to wait? Why do we, like, right now people are being reactive instead of proactive? And one of their biggest is like, well, we're waiting on funding. People are here waiting, and it's like, you can't keep using that excuse, we're waiting for funding. There's opportunities to network, to grow, to work with organizations like the Herb Carnegie Foundation. If you're trying to get into different communities that you've never been in before and you're looking at how to grow in a sport, work with organizations that already exist on how do you expand, how can we grow, and make those partnerships intentional. Don't just do it for a one-off event, but how do you make sure that we can do this so it's sustainable and it's something that's going to have a lasting impression? Right now, I've seen a lot of EDI committees, and like, I'm a part of one of them for an organization. We haven't met in 4 months. The last meeting was back in November. And when you do a follow-up meeting, it's like, okay, are we going to meet? Well, we're still waiting for direction from the board. We've been waiting for direction from the board for 4 months. So, but they have it out there. They have their press release that they have an EDI committee and all these individuals are on the committee, and that's what the public sees. But what they don't see is we haven't done anything except for meet once or twice, but now it's at a stalemate because we're waiting for direction. So there's a lot of that has happened. And then when the only time you really see some intentional movement is when they actually have people on their board, people in their organization with that lived experience, with the knowledge of how to move forward to try and grow some opportunities. And they do want to move forward. But right now, it's a lot of stalling, a lot of sitting back, a lot of blaming instead of trying to be proactive and do things in the community.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think in this time that we're in, I agree with you. It's definitely a lot of reactionary responses as opposed to proactive. So I guess a question that I have that I'll just throw it out for everybody is how do we hold these programs accountable? How do we ensure that they are not just checking a box to say that, oh, we have an EDI committee, right? That they're actually not only are they doing the work, but they're also following through on that. How do we sort of bridge that gap, I guess is my question.
Well, it's very hard to do. And I'm just listening to Shauna, and, you know, the older you get, the more you realize how difficult it is. And it requires that you have somebody within the organization that intentionally has to keep pushing it, because exactly what Shauna said, you've got the department. It means absolutely nothing. It's just a word, it's just a title. It's when you're tested to with something in front of you that you need to deal with. And then you find out what everybody's made of. And you'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you have to try to filter it through your own head to figure out when it's not going forward, what do you do? And I know over the years, there have been times when I've been in one group or another, and you're tempted to just walk away and quit because you can't fight it anymore, right? Or you end up kind of sticking with it and trying to do something. There have been times I've encouraged people, please don't leave. Please don't leave, because then we have nobody to fight it. The other team wins because of default. And if there's nobody there to be the conscience of the group, nothing changes. So sometimes it gets very, very hard to be that conscience and to keep fighting the fight. And you also have to know when you need to quit. You do have to know when you need to quit, because you have your own self, your own mental self and soul to look after. And I've heard many seniors, and I'm in the role of senior elder. I love it. I love being here. But I've heard other seniors go, I'm tired. I've been fighting this fight for all my life, and I'm just tired. And this is why we need this crew that is on this panel right now, who are ready to take up the mantle and continue to be somebody's conscience. Because if you opt out, then you're right. You go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and nothing happens. So I've heard some of my friends, and I have a lot of white friends. I was raised in an all-white community in North York. I was the only Black student in my classes for the first 13 years of school until I went to college. And I've had some of them say to me, you know what, I'm trying to explain to some of my friends, like the issues. And it's so hard. I can't get them to understand. And then you have those of us who have color. We've got this wonderful melanin going on and this wonderful color. And we go, well, you're just talking about it, but we're living it. Aren't we just sick and tired of living it? But we've got we can't stop. And that's what I saw my father do. He continued to fight the fight. The roadblock would come up and he'd find a way to do something else that was positive. And we have to keep finding ways to be as positive as we can in the face of the negatives.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, in terms of how we're meeting today on this, during the fireside chat, having this panel discussion is so important and so helpful, because it's also an opportunity for us to add to our resources. We do have other community members that we can reach out to. So I think somebody had mentioned that in the chat about understanding how you get tired, especially if you are the only one. That is why what Shauna did and continues to do is so important. That support is very necessary. So I think definitely having this platform and being able to really just draw on, the various panels that come on week to week, and just being able to really just add to your backpack, so to say, your backpack of resources, so that you can call on other individuals. So you don't have to feel like you are the only one that is fighting the fight. I think is so, so important. I do want to go back. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just to add on, it's also when you have the opportunity to bring things to the table to the people in power, it's bringing it to the table, but it's not just sitting there to bring complaints. It's also, let's bring solutions. And I can go back. It's amazing what happens when we work together. It's amazing what happens when we all decide collectively as a group of Blacks or a group of people of color to come together and band to say change needs to happen. And then the people in power or people in places, they don't have a choice but to listen. And I can look back at a situation that happened last year at one of our universities. They tried to hire, or they put it out in the community. They wanted to hire a Black football coach. Interviewed 3 amazing Black football coaches for the head coaching job, did not hire one of them. But instead, the next day posted that they were extending their head coaching job, but didn't tell the 3 Black coaches they interviewed on Friday that they extended the job posting on Saturday. So when the word got out that they extended the job, it was amazing to see how the Black community and the football coaches rallied around those 3 coaches. And unfortunately, that school did not have a head coach this past season. They had to find co-coaches, and that team suffered. And it was unfortunate for the athletes, but that university got that message loud and clear. You cannot come into our community, say you're going to do one thing, and then give an excuse of why you're not going to move forward with hiring somebody from our community, especially when they are talented and they're qualified and they have those right opportunities. And now we look at it going into the 2024 season, there are 3 BIPOC coaches, 2 Black males, and we have an Asian male that were all just hired this past year to fill vacancies. That has never happened before. Like, we might get 1 coach, but to get 3 in 1 year hired at predominant universities is like, people are understanding, if you're going to do something, we need to act and we need to do what we say we're going to do, or this is what happens when communities and groups and culture groups work together and stay together. We hold people accountable and we just keep going forward in that direction.
And just, piggybacking on Shauna's point too, the advocacy also demands an investment, right? And that's what I think many boards are not willing to do, is actually invest. Like, you are going to have a budget line and invest in these initiatives that support, Black people within these sporting spaces. And that's why these committees will sit and not do, not really go anywhere. And I think, as you said, Shauna, I felt that so much being on committees that never meet. On ED Guy committee, it just never met. And I ended up having to end up taking over the chair of this committee so we could actually meet and make some change and advocate to the board and do all that stuff. But it falls on women of color. So many women of color have really taken up these positions to go and advocate and be those champions and try to do that. And yes, it's hard being the only one. It can be very tiring to do that. You feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again. It can get very frustrating. But when you see the needle move a little bit, like you said, Shauna, you know, these hiring these Black coaches, and you think, okay, you know, you get that hope. I'm an optimist, so I I know that you know, I'm gonna make myself very tired all the time because I'm very optimistic. I think that like things are gonna change. And they are. We're starting to see some little bits of movement and maybe some other setbacks in other places as well. But it's advocating for investment, and there's not enough investment. They think that all this work is going to happen without having to have any type of investment or some change that's going to happen that's going to have to demand some money, a budget line of some kind to do this. And so it's encouraging organizations to do that, like to know right from the outset that this isn't something that just happens and we just like it's going to demand investment.
Absolutely. And just speaking of investment, there is a question in the chat that does sort of speak about that. Question is, how equitable is the pay amongst BIPOC personnel? Has there been any improvement?
I'd like to say something before we actually even get to that question.
Sure.
I had a friend who was a broadcaster, and he said to me, the 1 month I will not work is Black History Month, because that's the month that everybody wants you to come in and do everything free. So all the other months when you're at schools or wherever it may be, they will hire speaker, they'll put out speaker fees and whatever and pay everybody else. But during Black History Month, they think that, well, you're telling your story, so you know what, you should do that just because you want to do it, and you know your story isn't worth anything. But here's the thing, our story, our history is huge, and a lot of people don't know that history. What we carry in our heads and in our books and whatnot is valuable. And why should we be giving it away totally free? Now, not to say that I don't volunteer a lot. I do. And I have over the years. And I totally believe in giving of myself in that way. But when a company will hire one person and say that's the DEI department, and we'll give you a couple of $1,000s for the year to run that department, that you know you can't bring in people to help you, et cetera, you're hand tying the person that you've hired to do the job. And so it's very, very difficult to get, you know, it is sometimes just a check in the box. We've got a DEI department with a person sitting there. And I'll tell you, my daughter was a police officer. And when she started, she was the only Black female on her police force. And they had her plastered on all of their materials, and they were talking about how diverse they were and all of that stuff. One Black woman. She was one Black woman. And it created a problem too, because other of her colleagues were going, why are you getting all this attention? What's with you, right? They put her in a very, very difficult position. So, you know, we need to help people to rethink what this means. And you really know by the company that you're with, are they serious or are they not, right? Depending on what they do in that department and how wide they do it and what are they going to do throughout the year. Like, because this isn't a 1 month deal. We're here every day, 24/7. Here we are. And so we deserve to be treated as being seen. and not just put up with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the fact that every year, depending on what spaces you're in or wherever you're working or volunteering, the fact that they always look at the Black, if there's like that one Black employee or that one Black educator or Black coach, and they're looking at them to deliver, whatever the expectation is for Black History Month is, and I really challenge everybody on this call to really speak up and advocate and say, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to say no, because I think it's important to have the other side as well contribute to the education of Black Canadian history and what that means and what it stands for and whatnot. So for sure. All right. So just going back to the question that was in the chat about the equitable pay amongst BIPOC personnel. So do any of you feel like there has been any improvement in that regard?
To be honest, no. There hasn't. And even from when I've talked to municipalities or people that are doing the work, some of their white colleagues who are working EDI still get paid more money than they do. And they have either just as much education, just as much experience in the same fields, but their pay grade is lower than where it should be. And that's been across the boards at colleges and university sectors, in the not-for-profit, like, within the sport organizations. And again, like for me, I always look at it, it's interesting that when you finally do have a person of color, whether it's a Black woman, a Black man, or a different nationality that has the education, that has the experience, and also brings the lived experience to the table and some of the things from that nature, it's still not as valued as the white man or the white woman, and getting the same job, but preaching research to you, preaching their PhD research study or what their statistics tell them or things from that nature. But a lot of organizations and companies are valuing that a little bit more than when they value what we can bring at this time. And it's very mind-boggling to not understand why. And some people are leaving their jobs for that positions. And it's one of those where it's like, okay, if you don't want to invite me to the table or treat me equal, then I'm going to go build my own table. And I'm going to make sure that I can build that table, have enough chairs around to invite everybody, and make sure that we are being paid what we should be getting paid and being treated equal at that point in time, because it's not being done within the systems right now, not even in executive director roles, not even in athletic director roles, even head coaching roles. Like when you look at head coaching roles, I know in Ontario, I can't speak for other provinces, go ahead and look at the sunshine list when it comes out. How many head coaches are on that sunshine list? And out of all those head coaches, how many of them are Black that are on that sunshine list? But yet it's the Black coach could have a better record than some of the other coaches that are on that sunshine list, but yet they're on it and they're not. So we're still not being treated we're still not being evaluated or treated fairly the way we should be, compared to a lot of other people that are out there right now.
Right. Does anybody else have anything to add with regards to like equitable pay amongst the BIPOC personnel? Any improvements that have been made?
I don't have anything else to add to what I'm deferring to Shauna's expertise in this area, as being someone who's, entrenched in sport administration. As someone who is an academic in these spaces, and I'll speak to that a little bit if I guess in answering my own question later. But I think I would hazard to guess that it is below. There's a lot of hiring practices, particularly within university spaces, that are still extremely colonized. And so I think, when I remember having a question myself about my own pay, and speaking to my dean about it, and finding that there are a lot of people behind the scenes who advocate for more pay themselves based on applying maybe for other jobs outside of our university to another university, and maybe getting that offer and then bringing it back and using that as leverage. This isn't, I think, a system. I think that is taught to any minority professor at all. You know, you're really going in thinking like, I have my job and I have my increments, and you're paid well, but not noticing that there are colleagues that start at the exact same time as you, who apply for jobs, who bring back offers, particularly me being in the Manitoba situation, where if you haven't really noticed, are in sort of Maclean's magazine, we're usually among the bottom, 3 universities in terms of, I guess, status. Not that everybody follows Maclean magazine, but U of M constantly ranks a little bit lower. So, and part of that is pay. And so when people go and advocate for more pay for themselves, I feel like it's people of color who then get lost behind in doing that, because I feel like there's a sense of loyalty that we have, that, we think, I'm going to stay in this position, I'm going to stay here, and, I'm going to get, what the things I deserve, not knowing that I deserve more, and so we've been working on advocating for that a lot more within these spaces, and having, particularly Black professors, ask more questions related to that. And there are systems in place to help catch you up, but to help fill that, or not even bridge that gap, but really look at, equity in there. But you have to ask for it. It doesn't come to you, and you do have to go and find out and seek out those processes.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think in terms of like just information and sharing of information and all of that, typically is not shared openly. It's really through word of mouth and really just doing your own research, unfortunately. And I guess that's also leads to some of the areas of systemic racism and how they sort of keep out certain individuals from having certain types of information.
One of the things is that you actually don't know what to ask for either. So, you know what, you're used to, we put our own glass ceilings on ourselves because we're not confident enough to ask for what we deserve. And so, you have to somehow get past that and lose a few contracts along the way to get what you do deserve. But if it's a matter of, I really need the money, you'll take whatever they give you. Unfortunately, we don't always know what the other person was getting paid. And if they can pay you less, they will. Why would they give you more than they need to, right? So it's a real fine walk. You're walking the fence when you do it, but it requires a lot of confidence on your part to say, this is what I'm worth. And if they truly like who you are, they may bend, but they may not. So you have to be prepared to go the route of, I'm not going to get that because I asked for too much. But if we don't test the waters, if you don't test what you can do, you will always be below that line. You'll always be at the glass half full instead of the glass, what did it, empty, glass half empty and glass half full. I don't know, but yes, you're always going to shortchange yourself if you don't have enough confidence to go in there going, I'm worth more.
Absolutely.
And I bring value. What I have in me brings value. And so as we start to think better of ourselves, then we start to do a little better.
That kind of leads into my next question for you, Bernice. So as the co-founder of Carnegie Initiative and many other initiatives What would you say is the most important thing for organizations to consider when trying to become more equitable and diverse?
Well, that's hard because we are all conditioned by the society in which we have been raised. And I was raised here in Canada in the same systemic, with the same systemic issues that everybody else was. And so we're colored in some ways about how we approach things and the people that are chosen. Now, to begin with, hockey, and that's the background we've been talking about here. Hockey is basically an all-white sport. We are so limited in the players or the coaches or the referees or the managers, that we are almost unseen. So when we start our own organizations, how do we manage to get the people that are diverse to help us? Because sometimes we have to go outside of who we are in order to get that help, because sometimes that's where the money is. That those are the people that know, and yet we want to have people that look like us in positions. And sometimes it takes us a while to figure out how do we make it work for our own organization. It is not easy. It is not easy, especially when we're conditioned to the North American lifestyle. I'm talking both American and Canadian. And it's a fight sometimes. It's a fight to be the one that sits on the outside saying, that's not right. We need to do better. We're trying to make a point here. We're trying to make a point that our community is just as valuable and can bring just as much to the table. And we don't always quite make it, or we have to keep working at it. This is one thing. We have to keep working at it to help other people in the organization understand how important it is that they hear those voices, because they're not used to it, and they will not always accept what we have to say. We have to keep pushing the envelope until they get to understand our psyche a little bit better, and that we're not trying to hurt. We're trying to help and expand and broaden and bring people in and hear more voices and hear more perspective about what we're doing, because we're very limited in our own little heads. We're biased. Everybody's biased in their own way, and we're limited in our, in our perspective about what we do. So it's so important. I'm looking at the faces here on the screen, and I'm going, yes, no, you go, girls.
I love that. All right. I do see there's lots of comments that are coming through in the chat. So I think our audience are really enjoying our conversation. There is a comment here for Bernice. So Marie Clark said, future access was a lifesaver for many of the Black kids in the educational system. For many, that is the first they heard about our history in the sport of hockey. And I actually have to agree with Marie, because I think, yeah, myself included, I wasn't aware of the history, particularly in hockey within Canada. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. There was another question that I saw in the chat. I think it was from Angela Cassie. So I'll just throw it out there for all of the panelists. So I'm not sure if any of the speakers are aware of this initiative. It is great to see these 3 Black women coaching at the university level. I believe that they are planning a 3rd edition in 2024. And then she just put a link to, I believe, the CBC website. So not sure if any of you are aware of that particular initiative.
Yeah, it's the 4 women, 4 Black women head coaches in the university system. They're the only 4 currently in Canada that are head coaches, and they did this initiative again for the whole see it, be it, achieve it, because we don't always see, especially Black women as head coaches at the university level in Canada. So they wanted to be able to, and the one thing I love what they did was the first year they did it at Concordia. So they were in Quebec. And then the second year they did it this past year, it was at York University. And then I believe next year they're going to be at Trinity Western. So they're going to be out in British Columbia, and they're doing that. So it's like they're traveling, so they're able to hit the different communities and also be able to show the girls in those provinces, this is what's possible, this is an opportunity. And it's not just about playing the games, they do a lot of community stuff as well. So they have community clinics, and they have like they do panel discussions and workshops and other things. So it's not just about basketball. It's an opportunity for a sport to bring people together, and for them to do so much more about it. But the 4 coaches are at Concordia, York, UFT, and Trinity Western. So those are the 4 currently at the university level, not talking about the college level.
Okay, wow, very, very good to know. So definitely a lot of sharing of resources this afternoon. So definitely take a look at that website. And I want to move along to another question that I have for Dr. Strawn. So what needs to be done to have more Black academics who engage in research in sport in Canada? What are your thoughts?
I'm just gonna go back a little bit, like, we talk about our journeys through sport, and for myself, I've always been, involved in sport, and I had a chance to, perform or be involved in sport at a high level. And I think that passion for sport was sort of translated into why I do research and the type of research that I'm engaged with. So I think, I was really thinking, like, we have all these people, all these Black people who are involved in sport, particularly when we were working with athletes or, my general areas in sports psychology. So I had a chance to work with lots of teams. And I'd see all these, Black athletes at the university level, part of teams. And I think, okay, I'm going to go to research. I'm going to go to these conferences. I'm going to see all these Black people because, Black people are involved in sport, and then I'd go to these conferences and I would be the only one. And I think, what is going on here? Where's that disconnect where we have all these people involved in sport, students involved in sport, and none of them, many, maybe very, very few, feel compelled to maybe be involved in the research piece. And we know coaching is already an area in itself, but to engage in research. And so I think a lot of it is just similar to the coaching experience as well, seeing talent within our classrooms, seeing talent within academic spaces, within our, I guess, our classrooms, but really even thinking, when we're working with athletes at the university level, because they're passionate about sport, and if they're curious and have questions, that, maybe research is for them, and I think a lot of Black students maybe don't think research is for them, or can think of within the sports spaces, how can I, use my experiences as a Black athlete, to think about what are those research questions. And there's so many out there. There's so few research studies within sports spaces in Canada that are that talk about the Black experience within sport, or that are focused on our community. And so We need more Black graduate students. We need more Black undergraduate students to engage in research. I try this myself whenever I have a chance to go and speak to students, really, targeting and I feel like it's a natural gravitation a lot of the times because there's, again, not a lot within kinesiology spaces, and there's research and papers out there talking about the dearth, the lack of Black academics in sports spaces and physical education spaces, and also in sport. And so that area, that piece of representation always comes back. I think in any of the domains that we're speaking about within sport, again, someone who's in sports psychology, who does some applied work, but mostly in research, even in the sports psychology spaces, those people who are front line working with athletes, working with high performance athletes, working with the Olympians, working with those going to world championships, and many of them are Black athletes, and very few of them even have an opportunity to speak to a Black sports psychologist or someone who looks like them within those spaces. So I think we have to keep, engaging young people in various areas within sport, but I also don't want to forget that we do have this research piece as well, and these opportunities to engage in research related to Black communities.
And just a side question for you, Dr. Strawn. Do you think that a lot of the Black students that are on the post-secondary level, do you think many of them feel maybe intimidated because of the fact that there is a lack of representation? Maybe they feel like because there's not many in the field, that maybe no one really wants to hear about their experience, their perspective?
Absolutely. And I think Ms. Bernice talked about it earlier, within like bringing in Black history within educational spaces. And that's not just elementary, junior high, high school, but it's also through post-secondary education. If we offer more courses related to Black studies and understanding, the experiences of Black athletes and Black coaches, and kind of talk about that research more, then I think they'll start to see themselves as like, okay, yeah, there's actual research and things being done that have to do with my experience, and I think your question is really great. I think I'm stumbling a bit because I think that it's hard to think about everyone's experience very generally, but yeah, I think across the board, there are students who just don't feel connected. I noticed that when I go to our Canadian sports psych and exercise psychology conferences, that there are more Black graduate students who I see. There's still not enough. There's still very few, but at least there's a few more. And I think taking the time in the position that I am to go and speak to them and ask them about their work and what they want to do with their work, encouraging them and encouraging them to encourage others and to bring people along with them. I think hopefully, I can serve as that for them as well, but they can also serve as that for others and the other universities that they're going to when they're serving as TAs, when they're serving as grader markers, or they're able to do a lecture, that those students are going to see you in front, and I think that's really important then to try to reach out to those students and make that, demystify that a bit. I think in any of the spaces within sport, and maybe coaching, relates to that. Maybe sport administration relates to that a bit, that they have a hard time seeing because they haven't either been seen or haven't seen others in those positions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Yesterday, I was actually speaking at Toronto University of Toronto, and it was a group of students who were studying sport. And I was very encouraged when I looked at the audience to see how many people of color were in that audience, much higher than I had expected for sure. And I'm going, okay, this is a step in the right direction, that we had so many young people that were willing to take their weekend to go to a conference. And it was about learning more about how they could be involved in sport in all levels. It wasn't just as players, but in management and broadcasting and writing and all of that. So yeah, there are some things happening for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a comment in the chat from Donna. Just says the NFL had a similar challenge of getting Black coaches and face backlash when they began hiring more very qualified Black coaches. So I think we sort of see a lot of similarities across the bar in terms of, if we are sort of going in between the various different areas of sports. A lot of the same challenges are happening. And I guess just trying to bridge the gap, and then not just that, but also just making those connections across the bar in terms of, in the world of sports that, similar things may be happening in the world of hockey and also happening in the world of basketball or in the world of golf. And there are a lot of similarities, and I think it's really just trying to make those connections, and really just, as I mentioned before, adding to your backpack of resources, right? And reaching out to those individuals that you can connect with, that can help you. If you are feeling frustrated and you're feeling like you are the only one that's carrying the burden in that particular industry that you're in, and just really reaching out to your peers, your community members, and whatnot. As we are sort of winding down to the end of our session, I wish we could stay on and continue this conversation, but it is getting close to time. So I guess at this point, if each of you can maybe just give maybe like a minute, just some sort of last words that you'd like to share with our audience this afternoon, some takeaways.
I could go first, I don't mind. I think I was just writing down words as we were going along, and a couple of words that really stood out to me were community, intentionality, investment, representation. I think all those things are just important for us to consider in these sports spaces, whether we're engaging as coaches or sport administrators or academics or, community leaders and people who volunteer in the community. These are all important things when we're thinking about sport. And as someone in sports psychology, I love a quote. I've always loved quotes a lot. So one quote that always stays with me, and I use it in my signature line, and it's a reminder of a call to action, is by the late Dr. Maya Angelou, and she said, "Do your best until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." And that is always a reminder to me. Every time I send an email, I actually see it and I think, okay, am I doing better? What am I doing to do better? And keep continuing to learn so that I know more. But also when I know more, it's that call to action for us in these spaces to do more, and thinking about how we're pulling people with us and bringing people with us so we can bring the next generation to be even greater and to do even more than what we're doing now.
Just to add on to that, literally took what I was going to say. It's an opportunity when, if and when you have the opportunity to sit at a table with decision makers and to bring other people with you to that table, bring somebody that is different or a voice that hasn't been heard before. It's when we have that opportunity to open doors for others and to give others that opportunity, because it's not that easy to get into some of these spaces. It's not that easy for us to have those seats at those tables. So if we have that chance to help extend and grow and bring more people to the table, or have the opportunity to expand, definitely try and bring more, because that's how we're just going to do better as a community as a whole, is when we keep uplifting each other and we have a chance to help bring us to the tables, or other people that look like us to the tables. That's how we can become stronger as a unit and not just rely on other people to do the work for us.
Well, life is not always easy, but it's incumbent upon each of us to move forward in the most positive way that we can, and not to give up. And so I'm very grateful to the lessons that my parents taught me. It took me a while to get there because I didn't always have that self-confidence. But I think my self-confidence came around the age of 20 years old. And all of a sudden, I felt like I can do this. And as long as you keep feeling that you have it in you to stay strong and to do it, there is a pathway forward. And each of us is a part of that. So don't shortchange yourself. Don't take yourself out of the game of life. Stay in the game of life because you're going to be the best. My daughter often will say this, you're the best you. Nobody can be you. You're the best you that there is. And so the uniqueness of each of us and our personal abilities, because we're all different, use them in a way that carries you forward and carries other people forward. But take care of yourself. Take care of your own brain, your own body, because if you're not taking care of you, you can't fight these battles, or you can't move the needle forward in these things. And I think I said in the last session that one of the questions you might want to ask yourself is, why did this happen for me instead of happen to me?
Thank you so much. Very, very well said. So I just want to, as we're wrapping up this afternoon, I just want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here and lending your time this afternoon and being with us. I also want to thank all of our viewers that are on YouTube and on the Zoom. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Just want to, a few housekeeping items. Just want to remind everyone that next week there is no fireside chat that's going to be happening because it will be Easter Sunday. So just want to wish everyone a happy Easter and have a great, safe, long weekend. And also want to mention Happy International Women's Month to all of the women, as we are still in the month of March, so still celebrating. Just want to mention that. And yeah, and just thank everybody again for being here. And I just want to close off our session with a quote. So this quote is, "It's better to look ahead and prepare than look back and regret." And that was by Jackie Joyner Kersey. And again, just want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It is still beautiful outside. The sun is shining. Get some fresh air if you can. And thank you all again for being here this afternoon.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment. It's your time.